This isn't about romance. It's about leverage. The same principles that build businesses, reputations, and empires build attraction, discipline, scarcity, vision, self-respect, patience. You don't get obsession by trying to impress someone. You get it by becoming someone who cannot be ignored. Let's break it down into 5 core principles, not surface level advice, real principles. The kind that apply to life, money, respect, and relationships. Scarcity creates value and overexposure quietly destroys it. That principle doesn't just apply to money, markets, or rare objects. It applies to people. The truth is uncomfortable when you make yourself constantly available, constantly responsive, constantly adjustable. You reduce your perceived value, not because you are less worthy as a human being, but because human psychology assigns value based on access and effort. When something is always within reach, the brain stops working for it. And when the brain stops working, emotional investment declines. Think about how people treat unlimited resources. When water flows endlessly from the tap, nobody thinks twice about wasting it. In places where water is scarce, every drop is respected. The resource itself hasn't changed. The perception has. The same thing happens in relationships. If your time, attention, and energy are always available with no boundaries, they stop feeling valuable. They start feeling expected. Many people confuse generosity with overexposure. They think that replying instantly shows interest, that rearranging their schedule shows commitment, that being constantly present proves loyalty. But what it often proves is a lack of competing priorities, and that's where the problem begins. When someone senses that you have nothing else demanding your focus, they unconsciously downgrade your position, not out of cruelty, out of instinct. Humans are wired to respect what appears to be in demand. If your entire emotional world revolves around one person, the dynamic shifts. The trade-off becomes clear. You sacrifice your focus to gain proximity, and in doing so, you signal that proximity is your highest asset. Now follow the cause and effect carefully. If you respond instantly every time, they never experience uncertainty. If they never experience uncertainty, they never experience risk. If they never experience risk, they never feel the need to secure you. Without that subtle tension, emotional urgency disappears. And without urgency, obsession cannot form. This doesn't mean playing games or pretending to be busy. Artificial scarcity is easy to detect. It means building a life where your attention is genuinely allocated to meaningful pursuits. Work that requires depth, skills that demand repetition, health that requires discipline, ambitions that need uninterrupted concentration. When your calendar reflects priorities beyond one person, your availability naturally becomes limited. Not strategically limited, honestly limited. And honesty is powerful. Consider 2 individuals. One spends their day checking their phone, waiting for a message, adjusting their mood based on someone else's response time. The other has structured their day around training, building, learning, producing. They check their phone when they have time, not when anxiety pushes them. The difference is subtle but profound. The first person's emotional state is externally controlled. The second person's emotional state is anchored in progress. Which one feels more valuable? It comes down to opportunity cost. Every minute you spend hovering around someone's attention is a minute not invested in your own growth. And growth compounds. Attention chasing does not. Over weeks and months, the cost becomes visible. The person who sacrificed focus for validation stagnates. The person who protected their time evolves. People are attracted to motion, to forward movement, to direction. When you demonstrate that your life has momentum independent of them, they begin to see you as someone with trajectory, and trajectory is scarce. There's another layer most people ignore. Constant availability doesn't just reduce perceived value, it erodes self-respect. When you repeatedly prioritize someone who hasn't earned that priority, you train yourself to accept imbalance. Over time, you start feeling smaller. You may not admit it, but the imbalance registers internally. And people can sense when someone is operating from a place of subtle insecurity. Scarcity, when rooted in purpose, protects dignity. It says, my time has structure, my energy has direction. Access to me requires alignment. That doesn't mean being cold, it means being intentional. Look at everyday behavior. When someone receives a message from a person they value highly, they pause before responding. Not to manipulate, but because they care about the response. The emotional investment creates thoughtfulness, but when messages become constant and predictable, responses become automatic. There's no reflection, no anticipation. No mental replay after the conversation ends. Anticipation fuels attachment. When someone doesn't know exactly when they'll hear from you because you're engaged in meaningful work, they think about you in the gaps. That mental space is where emotional weight builds. Overexposure removes the gap. And without space, there's no room for curiosity. Curiosity is the beginning of obsession. The hard truth is that many people overexpose themselves because they fear being forgotten. They believe that constant presence secures importance, but importance isn't secured through repetition. It's secured through impact. A short, meaningful interaction carries more weight than hours of scattered attention. Discipline is the hidden driver here. It takes discipline to not check your phone every few minutes. It takes discipline to continue working when you want reassurance. It takes discipline to accept that you cannot control someone's level of interest through increased effort alone. That discipline communicates strength, and strength, quiet and consistent, draws respect. There's also a deeper psychological reality. People value what they invest in. If you are always the one initiating, always the one sustaining conversation, always the one pushing interaction forward, you rob the other person of investment. And without investment, attachment weakens. When someone has to think about you, reach out to you, wait for you, adjust for you, they begin to invest. Investment creates emotional stake. Emotional stake builds attachment. But none of this works if your scarcity is empty. If you limit availability without substance behind it, the illusion collapses. Scarcity must be backed by growth, by progress, by real focus. That means saying no to distractions. That means sacrificing short-term comfort for long-term positioning. It means understanding that your time is your primary asset, and assets must be allocated wisely. When you divide your focus between chasing attention and building your future, both suffer. Divided attention produces average results everywhere. Focused attention produces exceptional results somewhere. The market rewards focus, life rewards focus, relationships reward focus, but the focus must begin with your own trajectory. If you want someone to value you deeply, you cannot make them the center of your world prematurely. You must have a center that exists before them and after them. That center is your discipline, your ambition, your standards, your direction. Scarcity isn't about withdrawal, it's about prioritization. When your life is structured around meaningful goals, your availability shrinks naturally. When your availability shrinks naturally, your presence gains weight. When your presence gains weight, your words matter more. When your words matter more, emotional impact increases. And emotional impact is what people remember. Not constant access, not constant reassurance. Impact. If you build a life where your time is respected by you first, others will learn to respect it too. If you treat your energy as unlimited and disposable, others will follow that cue. People respond to the standards you set, not the explanations you give. So the real question isn't how to limit access strategically. It's whether your life is valuable enough to require protection. If it isn't, start building. And if it is, guard it. Because the moment you protect your time with discipline and long-term vision, your presence becomes something people have to earn. And what people have to earn, they rarely take for granted. Most people make a quiet mistake when they're attracted to someone. They study the other person's preferences like it's a blueprint for acceptance. They ask what music they like, what hobbies they enjoy, what personality traits they admire, and then they begin adjusting themselves accordingly. The logic seems harmless. If I become more like what they prefer, I increase my chances, but that logic contains a hidden cost. Every adjustment that moves you away from your natural identity weakens your internal foundation, and once your foundation weakens, your confidence becomes fragile. Fragile confidence cannot sustain attraction for long. Identity is not about stubbornness, it's about clarity. It's knowing what you value, what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you refuse. When you lack that clarity, you become adaptive in the wrong way. You start shaping yourself around external approval instead of internal standards. The trade-off feels small in the moment. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You pretend to enjoy activities that drain you. You soften opinions that matter to you. Each compromise seems minor, but over time, those small edits accumulate into a version of you that feels unfamiliar. People sense that. When someone interacts with a person who is overly adaptable, something feels unstable. There is no friction, but there is also no weight, no resistance, no edges. And without edges, there's nothing to push against. Human beings are drawn to defined shapes, not perfection. Definition. When you know who you are, your presence carries structure. Structure creates reliability. Reliability creates trust. And trust creates attraction that goes deeper than surface compatibility. Consider a simple scenario. Two people meet. One immediately begins mirroring everything the other says. Same opinions, same tastes, same goals. The other listens, agrees where it's honest, disagrees where it's genuine, and expresses preferences without apology. The first person may seem agreeable, but the second feels real. Realness is rare, and rarity holds value. Trying to become someone's type is a short-term strategy built on insecurity. Expanding into your own identity is a long-term strategy built on self-respect. The difference shows up in your posture, your tone, your decisions. When you operate from identity, you don't ask, will this make them like me? You ask, does this align with who I am becoming? That shift alone changes your energy. Cause and effect is clear here. If you prioritize being liked over being aligned, you dilute your standards. When standards are diluted, boundaries weaken. When boundaries weaken, respect decreases. And when respect decreases, attraction eventually follows. You might gain initial approval, but you lose long-term intrigue. There's also an emotional cost. When you constantly adjust to maintain someone's interest, you live in a quiet state of performance. Performance requires monitoring. Monitoring creates anxiety. Anxiety erodes presence. You're no longer relaxed. You're calculating. And people can feel when they're interacting with someone who is managing impressions instead of living authentically. Long-term thinking demands a different approach. Instead of asking whether you fit into their world, evaluate whether they fit into yours. Not from arrogance, but from mutual alignment. If your ambition is high and their lifestyle is stagnant, that mismatch will surface eventually. If your values emphasize discipline and theirs emphasize comfort, friction will appear. You can ignore these differences temporarily, but you cannot erase them. Opportunity cost applies here as well. Every time you invest energy in molding yourself for someone else's temporary approval, you divert energy away from strengthening your true identity. Identity is built through repetition. Repetition of habits, thoughts, decisions. If your decisions are constantly influenced by someone else's preferences, your identity remains underdeveloped. An underdeveloped identity feels unstable. People are not obsessed with perfection. They are drawn to conviction. Conviction signals direction. Direction signals leadership. Leadership signals safety. Safety creates emotional attachment. When you speak with calm certainty about your goals, when your schedule reflects your priorities, when your actions are consistent with your words, something shifts in how you're perceived. You no longer feel like someone auditioning for approval. You feel like someone offering access. There's a quiet power in saying, this is who I am, not loudly, not defensively, just clearly. Clarity reduces confusion, and confusion is what drains most modern relationships. When someone doesn't know where you stand, they test you. They push boundaries. They probe for flexibility. But when your boundaries are visible and consistent, testing decreases. Respect increases. Real-life examples are everywhere. Look at people who are deeply committed to their craft. The entrepreneur who works late because the vision matters more than weekend plans. The athlete who declines certain invitations because training comes first. The artist who refuses projects that don't align with their style. These individuals might not fit everyone's preference, but the people who resonate with them feel a stronger pull. Why? Because identity attracts alignment. It filters out mismatch. Trying to appeal to everyone guarantees depth with no one. Focusing on your identity guarantees depth with the right ones. There is also a psychological effect at play. When someone encounters a person with defined values and self-assured behavior, it triggers curiosity. Not because you're perfect, but because you're anchored. Anchored people are less reactive. They don't chase every emotional wave. That stability feels rare in a world of constant emotional fluctuation. Discipline reinforces identity. If you say you value health but neglect your body, your identity weakens. If you claim ambition but procrastinate consistently, your identity fractures. Integrity between belief and behavior builds internal confidence. Internal confidence projects outward, and projection shapes perception. Misplaced focus quietly destroys outcomes here too. When your focus centers on how you are being perceived, you neglect how you are actually progressing. You may gain attention, but you lose momentum. And momentum is what sustains long-term attraction. People are drawn to growth. Growth requires consistency. Consistency requires self-direction. Self-direction requires identity. The uncomfortable truth is that some people will never see you as their type, and that's fine. Not every opportunity is meant to be captured. Some are meant to be filtered. When you accept that, you stop negotiating with your core. You conserve energy, you invest it where alignment exists. There is strength in understanding that rejection of a false version of you is protection of the real one. If someone loses interest because you expressed a genuine opinion, that outcome reveals incompatibility early. That saves time. That preserves dignity. That prevents long-term resentment. When you expand into your identity, you may initially feel exposed. There is vulnerability in being clear, but there is also relief. You no longer carry the burden of constant adjustment. You no longer calculate every word. You move with intention. Attraction built on identity lasts longer because it is rooted in truth. It allows both people to choose consciously rather than react emotionally. It fosters respect before obsession. And respect is the foundation obsession stands on, whether people admit it or not. If you want someone to become deeply invested, give them something solid to invest in, not a flexible outline, not a rehearsed personality, a structured, evolving, disciplined self. That version of you will not appeal to everyone, but it will resonate powerfully with someone who values depth over surface compatibility. And that resonance is far stronger than temporary approval built on adaptation. Emotional control is power, and most people give it away without realizing it. Not because they are weak, but because they are reactive. They allow their mood, their confidence, and even their sense of self-worth to rise and fall based on someone else's behavior. A delayed reply changes their energy. A short message triggers overthinking. A subtle shift in tone creates anxiety. And in that reaction, leverage quietly transfers from them to the other person. If you want to understand attraction at a deeper level, you have to understand stability. Stability is not about being emotionless. It is about being governed by principles rather than impulses. When someone interacts with you and realizes that your emotional state is steady, that you are not easily shaken, something changes in how they perceive you. You feel grounded. Grounded people are rare. Rare qualities draw attention. Most emotional instability begins with misplaced focus. Instead of focusing on their own actions, growth, and direction, people focus on decoding someone else's behavior. They replay conversations in their mind. They analyze response times. They try to interpret silence. That mental energy has to come from somewhere. It comes from the same pool of focus that could have been invested in improving their body, their finances, their craft, their discipline. Divided focus produces diluted results. Follow the cause and effect carefully. When you constantly monitor someone else's attention, you become dependent on it. Dependence creates anxiety. Anxiety leads to reactive behavior. Reactive behavior lowers perceived confidence. Lower perceived confidence reduces attraction. It's not dramatic. It's gradual, but it is consistent. Emotional control interrupts that cycle. Imagine two scenarios. In the first, someone pulls back slightly. Maybe they become busier. Maybe their communication changes. The emotionally reactive person immediately tries to compensate. They text more. They ask indirect questions, seeking reassurance. They adjust their tone to regain approval. In doing so, they signal insecurity. The other person senses the imbalance and feels less pressure to invest. In the second scenario, the same pullback happens, but the response is different. The individual notices the change, acknowledges it internally, and continues focusing on their routine. They go to the gym. They complete their work. They maintain their schedule. They respond when appropriate but do not chase. Their emotional state remains stable. The signal communicated is subtle but powerful. My life does not collapse because of your fluctuation. That stability creates respect. Respect builds attraction. People are drawn to those who appear to have options. Options are not just about other romantic possibilities. Options are about emotional independence. When someone senses that your happiness does not depend entirely on them, they feel both relief and intrigue. Relief because you are not a burden. Intrigue because you are not controlled. There is also a deeper psychological principle at work. Humans test boundaries unconsciously, not in a malicious way, but in a curious way. They want to see how solid you are. If a small delay or change in behavior destabilizes you, the message received is that your foundation is weak. But if you remain composed, the message is that you are anchored. Anchored people feel safe and strong at the same time. Emotional control requires discipline. Discipline means pausing before reacting. It means feeling the urge to double text and choosing not to. It means experiencing jealousy and deciding not to express it impulsively. It means recognizing that your immediate emotional response is not always the most strategic response. That pause is where power lives. Most people act at the speed of emotion. They feel something and immediately convert it into action. But emotion is temporary. Decisions made from temporary states often create permanent consequences. A defensive message sent in frustration can shift the entire dynamic. An unnecessary confrontation can introduce tension where patience would have created clarity. Long-term thinking demands restraint. If your goal is not just momentary attention but lasting attraction, then you must value stability over drama. Drama creates intensity, but intensity without stability burns out quickly. Stability creates depth. Consider everyday observations. The calm person in a chaotic room naturally draws attention, not because they are loud, but because they are centered. Their energy contrasts with the noise. In relationships, the same principle applies. When emotional waves rise, the person who remains steady becomes the emotional anchor. But emotionally controlled is not suppression. Suppression means ignoring your feelings. Control means understanding them without being ruled by them. There is a difference. If someone disrespects you, emotional control does not mean accepting it silently. It means responding with clarity rather than volatility. It means setting boundaries without raising your voice. Calm boundaries are far more intimidating than emotional reactions. Misplaced emotional reactions often come from fear of loss. Fear that if you do not respond immediately, you will lose their interest. Fear that if you do not express insecurity, they will not reassure you. But fear-driven behavior often produces the very outcome it seeks to avoid. When you operate from fear, you overinvest. When you overinvest, you imbalance the dynamic. An imbalance weakens attraction. Opportunity cost applies here as well. Every emotional spiral costs you time, energy, and focus. Hours spent analyzing a conversation could have been hours invested in progress. And progress compounds. Emotional spirals do not. There is also a quiet confidence that grows when you master your reactions. Each time you resist an impulsive response, you strengthen your self-trust. Self-trust builds internal stability. Internal stability projects outward as calm assurance. People are attracted to those who trust themselves. When someone tests you by withdrawing attention and you maintain your composure, you communicate abundance. Abundance mindset says, if this doesn't align, I will continue forward. Scarcity mindset says, I must secure this at any cost. The difference is visible in behavior. Sacrifice is involved here. You sacrifice immediate reassurance for long-term positioning. You sacrifice the temporary relief of emotional venting for the long-term benefit of respect. You sacrifice reactive comfort for strategic composure. The long-term outcome is different. When someone knows you will not react impulsively, they think twice before creating unnecessary tension. When they know your mood is not easily manipulated, they respect your boundaries more. Over time, this builds a foundation of steadiness that feels rare. People often say they want passion, but what sustains passion is control. Without control, passion becomes volatility. Volatility creates exhaustion. Exhaustion leads to detachment. Control, on the other hand, creates balance. Balance creates endurance. If you want someone to become deeply invested, give them consistency. Let them experience you as stable across circumstances. Let them see that your focus remains intact whether they are warm or distant. That steadiness forces them to confront their own emotions rather than manipulating yours. Emotional control is not flashy. It is quiet. It is often invisible, but its impact is undeniable. It shapes how you are perceived, how you are respected, and how deeply someone feels your presence. When your reactions are disciplined, your words carry more weight. When your mood is steady, your presence feels stronger. And when your life continues moving forward, regardless of temporary emotional shifts, you signal that you are not easily shaken. That signal alone changes everything. Progress is magnetic because it signals direction, and direction is rare. Most people are busy but not moving. They are occupied but not advancing. There's a difference. Advancement requires intention. It requires sacrifice. It requires choosing long-term growth over short-term comfort again and again, especially when no one is watching. When someone sees visible progress in you, physical, mental, financial, emotional, they are not just observing change. They are witnessing momentum. And momentum creates gravity. Human beings are wired to pay attention to movement. In a still room, the eye naturally follows motion. In life, the same principle applies. When someone is evolving, improving, refining themselves, it draws attention without effort. You do not have to announce it. Progress speaks in posture, in speech, in decisions. It changes how you carry yourself. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what you prioritize. The cause and effect pattern is straightforward but often ignored. When you choose discipline over distraction, you accumulate small wins. Those small wins build confidence. Confidence shifts behavior. Shifted behavior changes perception. Changed perception alters how people respond to you. The original choice, waking up early, training consistently, studying instead of scrolling, seems minor, but compounded over months, it transforms your presence. Most people want attraction without transformation. They want attention without development. But attention gained without growth fades quickly because it has no foundation. Progress, on the other hand, builds layers. Each layer strengthens the next. When someone senses that you are becoming more than you were 6 months ago, they begin to project forward. They imagine who you might be in a year, in 5 years. That projection creates intrigue. People do not just attach to who you are. They attach to your trajectory. Look at everyday examples. The colleague who consistently improves their skills earns respect, even from those who once overlooked them. The friend who gets serious about their health begins to radiate a different energy. The person who invests time in learning, building, and refining themselves starts speaking with more clarity. None of this requires dramatic announcements. It requires consistency. Consistency is not glamorous. It is repetitive. It is often boring. It means showing up when motivation is low. It means doing the work even when no immediate reward appears. That is where most people quit. They choose comfort instead of compounding progress. The trade-off feels small at first. Skip the workout, delay the project, spin instead of invest. But small delays accumulate, and so do small disciplines. When you divide your focus between growth and distraction, growth slows. When you divide your focus between building your future and chasing someone's validation, progress stalls, and stalled progress weakens your magnetism. Because without movement, there is nothing to observe. There is also a psychological layer beneath this. People are drawn to potential, but only when potential is backed by action. Everyone talks about future plans. Few demonstrate daily commitment. When someone sees that your habits align with your ambitions, it signals seriousness. Seriousness commands respect. Respect deepens attraction. Think about the subtle shift that happens when someone who once seemed average begins to excel. The perception changes. The same face, the same voice, but different results. Suddenly, conversations feel different. The tone changes. People lean in, not because of appearance alone, but because progress signals capability. Capability feels secure. Secure people are attractive. Opportunity cost plays a central role here. Every hour spent improving yourself is an hour not spent in stagnation. Every dollar invested wisely is a dollar not wasted. Every skill practiced is a skill compounded. Over time, these investments separate you from the average, and separation creates distinction. Distinction creates value. It is important to understand that progress does not have to be public to be powerful. In fact, quiet progress often has more impact. When someone disappears into their work, focuses on their training, reduces unnecessary noise, and then reappears improved, the contrast is striking. That contrast creates curiosity. Curiosity builds attention. But progress requires sacrifice. You may miss social events. You may lose people who prefer comfort over growth. You may feel lonely during periods of intense focus. Those sacrifices are real. The question is whether you value long-term positioning more than short-term approval. Misplaced focus quietly destroys outcomes here. If your primary goal becomes impressing someone rather than improving yourself, your energy fragments. You check your phone during work. You skip practice to maintain conversation. You adjust your routine to stay accessible. Each adjustment feels minor, but over time your edge dulls. You lose the sharpness that comes from uninterrupted discipline. Sharpness is attractive. It signals clarity. When someone is deeply invested in their own growth, they carry themselves differently. Their time feels structured. Their priorities feel intentional. Their energy feels directed. That direction reduces desperation. Because when your life is moving forward, you are not dependent on one person's approval to feel progress. There is also a confidence that comes from measurable improvement. When you know you are stronger than last year, more skilled than last month, more disciplined than last week, your self-perception shifts. That shift is subtle, but visible. You speak with less hesitation. You tolerate less nonsense. You negotiate from strength. Attraction intensifies when someone realizes that being connected to you means being connected to upward motion. They feel like they are near something that is expanding. And expansion is exciting. It signals opportunity. This does not mean turning your life into a performance. It means aligning your daily actions with your future vision. When your actions align with your vision, progress becomes inevitable, and inevitability creates confidence. Long-term thinking requires patience. Progress is rarely explosive. It is gradual, but gradual growth is sustainable. Sustainable growth builds a foundation. A strong foundation supports everything else, including relationships. There is a quiet power in knowing that regardless of who stays or leaves, you are advancing. That mindset reduces emotional volatility. It reinforces emotional control. It strengthens identity. All of these principles connect. Growth fuels stability. Stability fuels confidence. Confidence fuels attraction. People notice patterns. If they see that you consistently improve, they subconsciously associate you with reliability and future value. They begin to imagine what life looks like beside someone who does not stagnate. That imagination deepens investment, but the discipline must be real. You cannot fake momentum. You cannot simulate growth for long. Eventually, results reveal truth. So the focus must return to fundamentals, daily habits, structured routines, clear goals, consistent execution. Progress is not about perfection. It is about direction. A flawed person moving forward is more compelling than a talented person standing still. Movement communicates life. When you choose growth repeatedly, you build something more powerful than attraction. You build leverage, and leverage changes how you are perceived. It shifts the dynamic from seeking approval to offering opportunity. The person who is rising does not have to demand attention. Attention gravitates toward them, not because they are loud, but because they are moving. And in a world where many remain comfortable in place, consistent progress becomes a rare signal. Rare signals draw focus. Focus builds curiosity. Curiosity deepens attachment. And all of it begins with a simple but disciplined decision to keep improving, even when no one is watching, even when immediate rewards are invisible, even when the path feels slow. Because over time, slow, steady progress becomes undeniable. And undeniable growth has its own gravity. Detachment is misunderstood because most people confuse it with indifference. Indifference says, I don't care. Detachment says, I care, but I don't cling. The difference is subtle,